Hello, guys. Hello. My name is Papa Johnson. I would like to become engineer. As a graduate, MCS engineer, you will be able to analyze and solve complex problems. In your career as engineer, you will also help develop high-tech logical solutions that can pave the way for new inventions and innovations. With MCS in engineering, you will be at the forefront for many changes in society, and you will be able to get jobs in almost any sector where technology is present, in Denmark and abroad. This is why when I grow up, I would like to become engineer. And so should you. You should also want to become engineer. Because the sooner you start to become engineer, the sooner you can quit school, start your own company, and become a billionaire now, right? Like, just think about it. It's easy, guys. You just gotta get into MIT or Harvard so you can drop out. Like, just think about it. The quicker you get into MIT, the sooner you can drop out of MIT and become a billionaire. Like, just think about it. The quicker you get into MIT, the sooner you can drop out of MIT. It's brilliant. Like, what else? Like, what other reason is there to go to MIT? That's what all the tech giants are doing. They get into MIT, they drop out of MIT. That's the way forward. What else are you gonna do? Like, build bridges and stuff? Come on, that's fucking dumb. Trust me, guys. Trust me. I know what I'm talking about. I'm an engineer, okay? You can trust me. For real, guys. You can trust me. I mean, I am an engineer. I don't do shady stuff. Except for YouTube videos. That's hella shady. What is up, guys? ThePartyKnife here. Now, apologies for the delay on this guide in particular, but it was actually a blessing in disguise, because if not for the fact that I was simply too tired to finish the last part last night, and if not for that, I would have ended up lying to you guys. Not intentionally, I should say. Pretty important detail. But as it turned out, I've done a lot of testing, and I mean a lot. Okay, I put way more time into these videos than you might think, especially on the Outcast engineer, because there was so much for me to discover, so to speak. And a mod that I had enabled that I didn't think about, because it was like it's like a mod that does like this tiny thing that seemed completely irrelevant, and I didn't know that it had affected all my testing. So I was literally about to tell you two completely false things about two of the engineering talents, fully recorded and edited and everything, right? So I was ready to put that out there, not realizing that hold on a second, this, like, I was playing today and it's just randomly on the official one where that mod can't be enabled, and I just realized, wait a second, that goes against, that shouldn't work. Wait, what? Back to testing, back to square one. So essentially had to re-record pretty much, I mean, a lot of the video, let's just put it that way, because that way it ended up seeming more consistent. Anyways, I'm also a lot less tired today. So, but regardless, let's get straight into it. I'm just gonna start off by showcasing a couple of key metrics, and then we'll get right into talking about mechanics. In other words, guys, let's see what you can really do with a degree in engineering. Now, when you click F, you essentially take out his crank-up gun, which consumes ammo based on your ability cooldown. And by holding down R, you crank it up and obtaining one of these 5 stacks. Now, as for his passives, he has Gunsmith, which gives him an ammo capacity of plus 50%, allowing him to have more shots. Secondly, he has Spotter, which increases range power of nearby allies, himself included, by 10%, essentially giving the whole team 10% more range damage. And lastly, he has Utility Belt, which allows him to carry up to 3 bombs in the same slot that you can then cycle between simply by re-clicking whichever button you use to equip your bombs. Lastly, regarding his ulti, it's worth mentioning that your career ability doesn't regenerate on its own. It only regenerates based off of how many stacks you have of Crank Up, each stack representing a total of 0.4 seconds of cooldown ability regenerated per second, for a total cooldown regeneration rate of 2 seconds per second at maximum, which is 5 stacks. But let's move on to some of the Outcast Engineer's base metrics. First off, he has a total HP pool of 100, which can be increased to 120 with 20% health on the necklace. And he has a career ability cooldown of 60 seconds, although that's the wrong way to look at it. Theoretically, he doesn't really have a career ability cooldown, because it doesn't regenerate on its own. And the exact same thing is true for amount of enemies cleaved and damage taken. He is the single only class, as far as I'm aware, who doesn't have this feature, which means that's just not something to take into consideration. The only way to regenerate your ultimate ability is by cranking up the gun manually in order to obtain these pressure stacks. On a little side note here regarding piston power, I did some more testing on Cataclysm difficulty specifically, and it does seem to be the case that when you're using the cockhammer you can pretty much stagger any target in any animation, at least with the cockhammer's first heavy attack, but this isn't necessarily the case for every weapon. Although the cockhammer with piston power seems to be able to stagger even a Chaos Warrior in his heavy attack animation, it seems that with a weapon like the dual wield hammers for example, you can still stagger a Chaos Warrior in most animations, but as you will see momentarily, his overhead attack was not one of them. You simply don't have the stagger power even with piston power, unless you're using something else to hit that stagger breakpoint, then you're still not going to be able to stagger a Chaos Warrior doing a heavy attack. In other words, if you're not using the cockhammer and you're playing on Cataclysm difficulty, then it might be a good idea to just, test out whatever weapon you're using, because otherwise you might end up getting smacked in the face. Anyways guys, let's move on. Now, because I am indeed engineer, I have, I've built this engineering marvel. Isn't it beautiful? All for the single purpose of holding that dummy up there. Anyways, because I am smart engineer. I've set off a bunch of experiments of sorts to test a bunch of stuff, or sort of showcase, not test, to showcase a bunch of stuff that I have found in all of my tests. But I thought first, as we go through, we would start out with the talents. Now, level 5, you're pretty much always going to be getting more Green's Enthusiasm. It's more consistent than Engineer's Resolve, which is stagger. Even with piston power, which would otherwise be the only example that I think is viable, where you would pick Engineer's Resolve, but that's almost not the case. Even with piston power, unless you're using some really abstract build, then and you generally don't get shielded weapons on this guy. Can you even? I don't even know if you can. Ah, you can, yeah, I thought so, but just to double check. But even in that case, I simply don't think it's worth it. So pretty much always going to get more Green's Enthusiasm. Moving on, we got the 2 talents here, which are the 2 talents that I talked about in the beginning that misled me due to a mod. Because for whatever reason, the talents were functional on my weapons, but not on my ulti. So I actually told in another recording that neither of these talents functioned for his ulti, because they didn't when I was testing it. But just to make sure, they absolutely do function on his ulti. But first up, we have leading shots. Every 4 ranged attack is a guaranteed critical hit. Now that does pretty much what you'd think. You can see the temporary buff in the middle of the screen. Every time it goes green, boom, you get a guaranteed critical hit. However, what it doesn't specify, unlike a very recent video where we did with Hellborg's Tutelage, where it says every 5 hits, guns a guaranteed critical hit, critical strikes can no longer occur randomly. This is also the case for leading shots, even though it doesn't actually say so. At least unless I have been remarkably so unlucky with my critical hits that it's almost unfathomable. That I'm 99.9% sure that that applies. As you can see, every single critical hit we're getting here is through the talent, and none of them crit randomly. So then you have armor-piercing slugs, which essentially does also exactly what you think. Now I've set a little experiment in behind here. Well, you're in my way, boy. Just to showcase it, and also to double check here. Let's 𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔤𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔄𝔬𝒻𝔬 shots, and we'll remove armor-piercing. And then we'll do, see, 2 enemies, right? 2 enemies. 2 enemies. 2 enemies. 2 enemies. Also with the other talent. 2 enemies. And with the armor-piercing slugs on. Obviously that's going to be 2. But this one, 3. 3. Of course, I don't know if it can just do as many here. But then it's still 1 more. It's probably because I had 2. Whereas without it, it would likely only be 1. Yeah, exactly. So that makes sense. And if you think about it in that context, that means armor-piercing slugs combined with 𝒮𝔲𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔮𝔬𝒻 is extremely not extremely overpowered, but it's an extremely good synergy, because that essentially means that versus Skaven patrols, that's literally just double damage, right? If you think about it, that's pretty much just double damage, because when you're just firing into a patrol, pretty much every shot is going to go through and hit another enemy, whereas you're otherwise limited to only hitting 1 armored minion, because that's just how armored minions work in general, unless the weapon has a specific trait stating that you can hit multiple armored enemies. Then otherwise you can only hit 1 armored enemy. So yeah, absolutely great talent. Then we got Scavenger Shot. Melee power is increased by 10%. Every 5 melee kills makes Spartan's next ranged attack consume no ammo. So it works very similar to leading shots in that you kill minions that stacks up a buff. Once the buff is active, your next single ranged shot is just, I would still be at 6 ammo now, right? Which is not particularly great. It's mostly, if you're gonna pick it, then it's mostly for the ammo, for the melee power, maybe combined with piston power and full head of steam. But that's off meta. Let's put it that way. It's definitely off meta, and you're rarely gonna be using it. As for the level 15 talents, you're almost always getting enhanced power for this hero. Almost universally. As I can see situations where you might grab mainstay, but they're few and far between in this case. So for the sake of simplicity, you're universally going to be using enhanced power. As for the level 20 talent, this is where things get slightly to preference and playstyle, I would say. Personally, my favorite is Superior. I think a case can be made for all three, first of all. I think the one you're going to be using least is Full Head of Steam, because it's the one that's hardest to apply to the real world, so to speak. Because essentially what this one does is, as soon as you get the max stacks, boom, now you have 15% extra power. But that power buff coincides roughly with the amount of time it takes to do a full volley. So for that reason, I can actually see use for it. Also in another build that I've done specifically, but we'll get back to that. I think the 2 most common ones are going to be these 2, right? And the primary difference between them is you have the more active one, which is this one right here, which is called Experimental Steam Capacitors. And essentially what that allows you to do is you can crank up the gun, and while it's at 5 charges, you can shoot. Let's just grab another talent, there we go. So you can crank it all the way up to maximum without any worries, and you can shoot and it's not gonna go away, right? And then you can sort of refresh the buff whenever you feel like you need to. You can also get fully, like all the way up to your maximum ulti, and the charges won't be removed, which means you can sort of start shooting, and then it's still gonna keep reloading, right? It's still gonna have a cooldown despite that. But the thing about this talent is that it's a very active talent. It's a talent you pick with the understanding that it's only worth it
if you're going to be very active with your ulti. And so you only really get value from this talent if you actively, throughout the game, constantly are thinking about, okay, I need to just use my ulti, now I need to be at max stacks, then I'm gonna use my ulti a little bit more, then I might swap away, but then I need to be like conscious of the fact that, okay, but before the 5 stacks were gone, I switch back to my my gun, I crank it up one more, then I go back to melee again possibly, and now I'm almost at max stack, so I take out my gun again, I shoot, and then repeat the process, right? But it's a very active talent in regards to the value you can obtain from through the ulti. Whereas Superior Gaskets, which is my favorite, because honestly, not gonna lie, I feel like half the time using his ulti on Cataclysm at least is a liability. It's very hard to get value out of on Cata, because even in the situations where the value is there and where you have the space to use your weapon, then your teammates are in the way. Because the only way you're gonna have the space to use this weapon is if your teammates got your back, right? Either your back or your front, depending on positioning. But quite often, when you have the room to use the weapon, you also have your teammates in the exact position where you want to shoot, which can be bothersome, but that's not their fault, of course. But this talent right here only allows you to crank it up 4 times, which means that the regeneration rate is going to be slower. It's going to be 4 times 0.4, so 1.6 seconds of career ability cooldown per second is going to be refreshed. But the great thing about it is you don't have to think about it. Like, you use your ability whenever you feel like, okay, I gotta use it now for whatever, then you crank it up 4 times, once, swap back, and now you don't think about it. Now you're just playing as if I don't have an ulti. Until it's all the way up, and once it's all the way up, you're like, oh, nice, now I can use it again, and you go back, you waste all of your career ability, not waste, but like you get the full value, you use all of it, and then you only have to crank it up once more, and then you can forget about it. So you don't have to be as active, so it's way easier to just, you use your ulti when you feel like you need it, and feel like you have to, and you don't have to think about it the rest of the time, right? You don't have to constantly crank it up, because that's the annoying thing about the other one, is that you use it up, and then you have to sort of very actively, constantly crank up, because otherwise it's never going to get back to maximum, right? So that's the great thing about that talent. Moving on to level 25, we got Ablative Armor. I think this is also another talent where all 3 are viable. Obviously, this is the safe pick. This is the safe choice if you struggle to survive. It gives you 25% damage reduction. And if you get hit, then that's then reduced to 20% and 15% and so on. But it's essentially a 25% damage reduction buff, because most of the time you're going to get hit once and then you're in defense mode, right? Then we got Bombardier, and it does exactly what it suggests in the talent. It essentially gives you a double function of your bombs. Boom! So you got both that fire and you got that explosion. Absolutely amazing talent. And I got a whole build just focused around that. Then we got Piston Power, which is the most underrated and interesting talent in my opinion. It was a talent where, when I read it the first time, right, like when the Outcast Engineer had just come out, my initial thoughts were, wow, this sounds like an absolutely useless talent. Why would anyone ever possibly pick Piston Power over Bombardier? Ever. But let me show you why. You might. This is why, guys. This is why, okay? That's why. Like, that's why. Just take a moment to consider how ridiculous that was. Like, the fact that you could do that. Just think about that. Every 15 seconds. Oh shit, that was the wrong spawn button. Boom! See ya! Like, how fucking awesome is that? Like, not only is this one of the most satisfying mechanics of any talent in the game, in my opinion, because that is just a satisfying feeling, right? And like, it's not just bosses. Like, we can take it a step further. It also works. It also works versus lords. Okay. Hello, Budvar. We meet again. Like, that is just absolutely insane. anyways, let's get back to talking about his talent. Next up, we have his ultimate. That is the next one. Now, some numbers should be appearing on your screen right around now. Right around, like, over there. And those numbers, let's start out by, it's going from right to left here. So, actually, let's start in the middle. Let's start in the middle, right? 60 seconds. Now, this talent right here, which was called Link Compression Chamber. Now, the area in which this talent is superior to innovative ammo hoppers is in that you click, and boom, you're already at max firing capacity, right? And so that's really great for builds where you're not focusing on your ulti. Like, if you had to pick between the two talents, if you pick the one on the right, again, sort of like with the active crank mechanism versus the inactive crank mechanism. In the same sense here, one of the talents require, like, you only get value from the other talent if you're very active with the gun. Most of the time when you're shooting, you don't need those extra 30 seconds for, I believe, a total of, if my memory serves me right, it was 90 shots in 60 seconds. No, it was 80 shots in 60 seconds, which means 120 shots in 90 seconds. That's the one. It was 1.25 shots per second, if I recall correctly. And so, essentially the damage, like the actual practical difference of damage over time, I don't think it's going to be that different, with the small caveat that you have 4 seconds of free shooting every time you kill a special with one, right? But really, I find that most of the time when I pull it out, I don't like the crank up time. You know what I mean? The crank up time, again, means you need even more space just to get started. And you're just not always going to have that space. And for that reason, I actually, quite often, I mean, I know it's not that bad. It doesn't start out shooting in slow motion exactly. But, I don't know. I quite often actually find that I prefer to have the Link Compression Chamber. But I wouldn't say it's better. Let me just put it, I think it depends on your playstyle and how active you are in cranking up the gun. Lastly, we have a Gromil Plated Shot. Now, there are both great and annoying things about this talent. Firstly, it just looks stupid. Let's be real, compared to the other gun. Not that important, but let's be real. Secondly, it doesn't feel as good. At least not to me. Let's be real. This is just not as much fun as this. There's no argument. It's just not. It's just not as fun. But it is, however, way more viable, in my opinion. At least under the assumption that you have a melee weapon that's capable of cleaving, that has decent cleave, right? Because sure, if you got the one-handed or two-handed axe, then you're going to need something to deal with hordes, which could then be your ulti. But in most cases on high difficulties, you're going to have that. You're going to have the two-handed hammers, you're going to have the cock hammer, maybe, like, yeah. You're going to have dual-wheel hammers. So in that context, I think that the difference in armor damage is pretty stark, as you can see from the numbers, right? But anyways, the armor damage of this ulti is pretty stark. Like, it deals identical infantry and armor damage, so there's no difference there, unless you have, obviously, depending on your item properties and such. But if you just imagine again that you're shooting into a storm vermin patrol, right? You're essentially going to two-hit a storm vermin if you actually have the right properties, right? You're going to two-hit a storm vermin on cataclysm difficulty, and every single shot you take is going to shoot through a storm vermin hitting another storm vermin. And you're going to take 30 shots with a full ulti. That equates to 15 storm vermin killed, if everything goes perfectly, right? If each attack hits 2. Let's just put it this way: you can easily take out most of a storm vermin patrol like this. Now, which brings me to the next thing I lied about in my other take. And I actually think I'm gonna I actually want to show you, right? Because it would have been absolutely embarrassing if I'd released that video. Like, holy shit, let me show you some footage. Essentially, this is what happened. But I also found out a couple of other interesting things. Okay, so if you look at those exact same numbers, and you might have noticed that I wrote never go for headshots here, and there's a specific reason for that. And I mean with the ulti specifically, right? Okay, so check this out. If I take just one shot, normal shot, double shot, one shot, I can't not hit him twice. If I shoot him in the body, right? Can't be done. Always, every single time, boom, it's a double hit, right? Watch what happens if I try to shoot him in the head. It doesn't count as a headshot because the crank up gun is not a ranged weapon in the same sense, which is also why the talents in here aren't working. It's because aren't working with the crank gun. The crank gun is not the same as sort of a bounty hunter ulti that's just firing a lot. It's not. It's a different mechanic in game, and it gets calculated differently. At least that's my best hypothesis. Obviously, I don't know the code, but that's my best guess. Because something is definitely weird about it in relation to other ultis. And it's the same with the other. Whew, that would have been a train wreck. Holy shit. Anyways, let's move on to his weapons and how to use them. Now, in the 4 builds that five builds, sorry, that I'm going to show you guys, I'm focusing. I've narrowed it down. I didn't want to be too wide on this hero in particular. There should be content for another video as well, you know. We're going to focus on 2 melee weapons. That's the cockhammer and the dual hammers. And then I've only focused on the masterwork pistol. Now, a lot of what applies to the masterwork pistol could also apply to the what's it called? I can never remember what it's called. The Grudge Raker, which is also another great option. But in this video, we're going to focus on the masterwork pistol. Now, the thing to know about the masterwork pistol is it has the same damage profile as the handgun, the one-shot handgun of Cooper and Bardian, but it doesn't, not quite, because the damage drop-off of the pistol is a lot higher. That is, the damage drop-off with distance. Now, I'm going to show you guys, when you take a shot up close here, 10, 15, right? That's the same for this dummy right here, but it changes over here, but it's not a stark change, right? You see, it's fairly, you know, it's not too bad. It's not a big difference. Then as we go further, the difference starts to get a lot more visible, right? And essentially because of the fact that, there we go, because of this drop-off, that's essentially what you're building breakpoints around. Because really, it can essentially, up close, it can one-shot pretty much anything that isn't a Chaos Warrior or a banner, right? So you're essentially, so it's a bit harder to manage breakpoints. You need to be clever about it, because essentially, like, one of the builds I've done, for example, is, okay, let's see, at what distance can I no longer one-shot a Storm Vermin? That would be at this distance, because the Storm Vermin has 8,800 health on Cataclysm difficulty, so again, a one-shot body shot would no longer apply to that distance, right? So what could I do? How much would I need for it to apply at that distance? So on and so forth. And essentially at maximum range, not at maximum range, but the maximum drop-off, headshot first try, is half damage, right? That's a 50% reduction. So it goes from 100% to 50%. That is the damage drop-off. And at a certain distance, again, at that distance here, you see the damage drop-off didn't increase, despite the fact that this dummy here is like way further. What the fuck is it? We can't barely see it. There we go. Goddamn well camouflaged. As you can see, that's identical damage to shooting on that dummy there. So yeah, just something to note. As for the cock hammer, you already know how to use the dual wheel hammers. If you don't, then I have other videos for that. As for the cock hammer, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a reverse two-handed hammer. Its heavy attacks, it's also very similar to the execution sword. It's one of those weapons that you just almost can't use it the wrong way. Your heavy attacks, overhead armor damage, single target, you know, super easy to use, super easy to understand. And your light attacks, cleave. That's all you need to know. That's literally how simple this weapon is. Nothing fancy about it whatsoever. Also, we should mention that on the Masterwork pistol here, it's way less accurate when you hold down the right mouse button and actually spam attack. The accuracy goes down, and I actually did a bunch of testing because I was thinking maybe there's like in Counter-Strike where there's a spray pattern, and maybe if you knew that spray pattern you could account for it, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It just seems to be a lot of a lot of increase in the overall accuracy randomness. At least as far as I could tell, I couldn't find any discernible patterns. And obviously your crosshair shows roughly the I was about to say insecurity. I mean uncertainty in the shot, right? And I think if you're like me, you're likely using this way too much and being way like this is great when monks, 3 monks, are running into your face. That's when you should do that. Or when you have plenty of ammo and there's a boss and you can just freely shoot it, right? Those are the situations you should do that. Other than that, it's way better to use the single target shot. But I find myself constantly having this like built-in muscle memory assumption that I'm more accurate when I hold down right click. Right? So it's like, oh, I need to take aim. Oh yeah, fuck. Doesn't work that way. Anyways, I think that's pretty much all you need to know. Now we can move on to the builds. I've done a quick play solo queue 1 and 2. These builds are very similar. Crit chance stamina recovery, chaos attack speed, stamina health, bark skin. They differ in that the Masterwork pistol on one build is combined with loading shots, essentially for a 50% ammo return on your shots, assuming you hit them. Every 4th shot, you're gonna get 2 back. And then in this quick play build, I've picked up Bombardier. I'm not building around it here. I've just picked Bombardier because I think it's a great value talent for quick play. You're almost guaranteed to get value out of it. If you feel less comfortable, you can also get ablative armor here, and you can also get piston power. Honestly, there's no, you aren't building around any of these talents. And I think Grommel plated shot is the best talent overall, but you could, in theory, switch it for either of the 2 others here, and it wouldn't ruin any synergies. You know what I mean? You can argue which one is best, but it wouldn't ruin any of the synergies. So it's not that important, is what I'm trying to say. So you could easily switch any of those. Then you have the other talent here, which runs armor piercing slugs instead. It has conservative shooter instead, and thus also no, it's the same properties, I believe. Yeah, it's the same properties. It's just a different way of replenishing ammo. And for this one, it's essentially the difference between the inactive and the more active. So for the active here, I have still chosen to get the link compression chamber because that's my own preference. But again, if you like this talent, then you could easily switch it. Then you should switch it out for the innovative ammo hoppers. And I've also gone Bombardier in this. These 2 talent builds are very similar, and essentially just revolve around how you want to use the crank-up gun. Then we got the huge PP of cock power. Huge PP because of the piston power, right? And you know, it's also very similar. Infantry Skaven, conservative shooter, because we're going armor piercing slugs, enhanced power, superior gasket, because that's my own personal preference. I think it's again the more comfortable talent, because then I don't have to worry about having to use my ulti all the time. Then I just crank it up once and I'll use it when I need it, when I feel like here's a good value, and then I crank it up again and stop thinking about it. And I love the piston power talent. It's so great. I think it's so satisfying. Up next we have the Bombardier, you know, combination of Bombardier and Engineer. Engineering words here. Again, same temporary HP talent, obviously, but what this build does is particularly interesting. Okay? Particularly interesting. See, I've gone Hunter on my Masterwork pistol with Chaos Infantry on. I've also gone Leading Shots. And I've also gone Bombardier. Right? Now let me show you guys something here. Oh, of course I already used the... Just need a strength pot here. There we go. Now, let's just try first without having the guaranteed crit. That was hard to see, but 14,900 essentially, right? But what you can do with this build is you can time for the you know, make sure that you aggro patrol. Then you take a few shots until your talent and until your passive is active. Then you take out your bomb. If possible, you equip your ranged weapon. Then you take out your bomb, and that actually matters for the power versus properties. But essentially, what's going to happen is now it's going to crit. And regardless, even if you were to use your melee weapons and then click 3, it would still crit and get 100. It's just about the power versus properties on the actual weapon. But regardless, watch this. That is a lot more damage, right? That is a lot more damage. But then again, you might be like, man, it wasn't that much more. That wasn't that impressive. Okay, then watch the difference when you also include a strength pot. Yeah. So 25,400 plus 270 in burn damage, right? That's roughly, but overall, roughly speaking, we're talking about slightly over 25,000 damage. And that's an interesting number. And you know why it's an interesting number? If you go into the bestiary and you see the exact amount of HP a Chaos Warrior has on Cataclysm difficulty, then you would note that it has 24,800 HP. And you don't have to be a mathematician exactly to realize exactly then if you also have explosive ordnance. Although you could also, a case could also be made for shrapnel, just to get that guaranteed damage across the line. But regardless of which one you have, I'm sure you don't need to be a mathematician to calculate that if you were indeed to take this and throw it into a bunch of Chaos Warriors. Alright boys, let's see what we got. Boom! Okay, some of them did survive, some of them in the edge, but still, I think just, you know, blatantly solo killing 9 Chaos Warriors on Kata with a single bomb. And like, keep in mind, that was 1 bomb. You have 3, possibly. Right? So like, you could take out, like, you could take out a super patrol, okay? So yeah, and then lastly we have the Cranky Survivor, which is essentially just a safe build, right? Where you got the damage reduction. I would have probably taken Link Compression Chamber here now that I think a little bit more about it, but I thought I would include, again, that's why it's called the Cranky Survivor, because this is one where you have both the active talents for this particular build. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll throw links down in the description to all of the builds. Now, this is the part where we usually have some gameplay commentary going on, but I felt like this guide was already so long that if I attached a whole game of commentary to the video, I felt like the video would be over an hour almost, at least very close to. So instead, I decided to take that commentary part. I'm gonna upload it as a separate video that I will also put in the same playlist as sort of an attachment to this video, where we're gonna go through some gameplay, talk about that. So join me for that if you want to. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. If you did, I would very much appreciate the like, comment, and a subscription. Because these videos, in particular, they take a lot of work. This video was essentially 2 videos in one because of the whole screw-up thing. But thank God for doing own testing. Like, holy, that's why you should always draw your own conclusions. Like, I mean, I know I misled myself, to be fair. But nonetheless, even without all of those things, there was still a bunch of stuff that just worked differently, like to what I expected. Things such as the critical hit talent, where you don't actually still have your base critical hit chance. Stuff like that is just hard to know until gone through the experiments, right? And it takes a lot of time to do these things. And I really try the best. I care so deeply about being truthful with what I say. And I'm so happy that I did make Like, oh, that would have been a nightmare. Like, that would have been enough for me. I've never deleted a video. Like, I've never had to delete something I put up before. Like, once a video was published, right? I've never, like, I privated the other stream the other day because I felt like it was a pretty boring stream. But I've never, like, looked at something and gone, oh, this is unacceptable. I'm gonna have to remove this video. I would have removed that video if I had found that out. So, really glad that didn't happen. Anyways, I'm rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Appreciate you all for watching. And as always, love you guys. Stay awesome. Peace out. And for real though, becoming an engineer, respect. Respect. See guys, an engineer, very much like a wizard. See, wizards are always good or bad, right? You have your Gandalfs, your Dumbledores, you have all of your amazing wizards you can trust 100%, right? Then on the other side, you have your Sarumans, have your Voldemorts, right? It's like completely 100% not trustworthy, right? Like, they will build a bridge that will fucking kill you, or a train, some shit, right? So in that sense, an engineer is almost like being a wizard. In that you can either trust them 100%, 0%. How do you spot a trustworthy engineer from an untrustworthy? Quite simple. If they say, trust me, I'm an engineer, then you don't